Back in 2022, me and my dad decided to hike up Mount St. Helens. We hike together all the time, so this is nothing new. In fact, I'm going back for another hike up the same mountain tomorrow. But one thing was different than the rest of the hikes. Mount St. Helens is a little over 4 miles up, with about 1 to 2 miles through a wooded area before you start hiking up the rocky open parts. Just as we exited the wooded part and started hiking up the first set of rocks, we heard a voice. The voice screamed, "Dad!" It sounded exactly like my brother's voice. We had come with my brother because we were on a trip in the area, and this was one of the activities we had planned, but he did not want to come. My brother is out of shape, very unathletic, and hates hiking. Once we heard this voice, me and my dad turned to each other to make sure we weren't hearing things, and sure enough, we both heard it. Without a doubt in our minds, we instantly agreed that it sounded exactly like my brother. Since we were 1 to 2 miles in, we knew it was almost definite that he had not come this far. We stayed there for a good amount of time to make sure it wasn't someone behind us, but no one came. No one had passed us coming down for a good amount of time, so it couldn't be that. To make matters worse, a fog rolled into this exact area while we were watching for people, so we took no chances and just continued the hike up. We made it to the top and came back down with no more problems. Once we got down, we asked my brother if he had come, and all he said was, "I never left the car." This experience has left a mark that me and my dad will never forget. Update. We completed the entire hike again with no problems, but every time we passed that area, there were always people around, unlike last time. But while we were walking through the forest on the way back, I kept having the distinct feeling of being watched. I never saw anything, so I don't know what it was. When I was in high school, I moved to a major city's suburb. While the majority of this area was suburban in appearance, there were still some rural features. One thing I hated about this area was that it didn't have the best lighting. Streetlights in my area were scarce, so it was always extremely dark at night. My house was situated at the corner of a street and an avenue. My house faced the main street, which was a few miles long, and led to many neighborhoods in the area. The avenue that my house was on ran perpendicular to the main street, was about 1/4 of a mile long, and was made up of about 6 houses. The avenue was almost entirely gravel. At the end of the avenue, the gravel ended, and dense vegetation began. This dense vegetation eventually led to a state forest. At the time, I had been dating a girl who lived in the area. In order to walk to and from her house, I traveled the main street previously mentioned and walked it all the way to the end of the street. The end of the street led to a small field. Walking through the field led to a wooden fence. The wooden fence separated the backyards of multiple houses, including her house, from the field. After leaving her house one night, I realized that it was a lot later than I thought. It was after midnight, and we had school the next day, so I wanted to get home and get to sleep. After she locked her fence door and went inside her house, I turned around and made my way through the field. As mentioned previously, this area had virtually no lighting at night. For this reason, I opted not to use the sidewalk and walked in the middle of the main street. I did this mainly to monitor my surroundings. Walking in the middle of the street meant I could use the moonlight and could avoid walking extremely close to trees. At this point, I was nearing my house and was approaching the area I called the Black Hole. I called this area the Black Hole because it was the darkest stretch of my journey home. There were no street lights and mostly trees on both sides. After entering the Black Hole, I began to hear a weird sound. It was too far to make out clearly, and I thought that it may just be an animal, so I didn't think too much of it and continued walking. I could see a car approaching in the distance, so I momentarily made my way to the sidewalk, waited for the car to pass, and made my way back into the middle of the street. After maybe a minute of walking the main street, I heard the sound again. At this point, I realized the sound was getting louder, so I decided to increase my pace. As I was nearing my house, I continued listening for the sound in hopes that I could determine its origin. The longer I listened, the louder it got. Eventually, the sound was so loud that I could clearly make out a forceful inhale, exhale. I was terrified. I knew that whatever was making the sound was extremely close to me, but I decided that I would not look back until I got close enough to my house. This way, I could utilize the light from the only streetlight in this area at the corner of my house. I could hear the inhales and exhales getting louder and louder and louder until I finally neared the streetlight. I eventually worked up the courage to turn around and was shocked by what I saw. When I turned around, there was a man right behind me, not on the sidewalk or on one side of the road. He was so close to my back that if he tripped, he would have knocked me over. I looked into his eyes, and he looked into mine. He then abruptly moved around me and ran down the avenue that I lived on and into the darkness. So, I had zero intention of sleeping in my car that night. I was out with some friends in downtown St. Louis, bar hopping, just enjoying the night, you know. But then I lost track of how much I'd been drinking. By the time it hit me, I was way too hammered to drive, but I didn't want to blow money on a hotel or figure out an Uber back to the suburbs, so I made the dumb decision to sleep it off in my car. I ended up parking in this small, mostly empty lot near the riverfront. It seemed quiet enough, no sketchy vibes, at least at first. My car's an old sedan, not exactly built for comfort, but I tried to make the back seat work. Grabbed a ratty sweatshirt from the trunk to use as a pillow, cracked the windows just enough for air. The streetlights were flickering above, giving off this weird, eerie glow, but I was too tired and too buzzed to care. Eventually, I drifted off. But at around 2 a.m., I woke up to this tapping on my window. My first thought? Great, a cop's gonna bust me for sleeping here. But nope. It wasn't a cop. I squint out the window and there's this figure standing there, right up against the glass. The light from the street barely hit them, just enough to make out the shape of someone in a hoodie, standing way too close to my car for comfort. I tried to play it cool, thinking maybe they'd go away if I didn't react. But then they started circling the car slowly, dragging their fingers along the glass. My heart was pounding. They stopped at the driver's side door, and I heard them try the handle. Thank God I'd locked it. Then they moved to the back window, where I was lying down, and pressed their face against the glass. I couldn't see their face clearly, just this shadowy outline of eyes staring right at me. I didn't move, barely breathed, just hoping they'd get bored and leave. After what felt like forever, they stepped back, but I didn't hear them walk away. I stayed frozen, trying to figure out if they were still there. Finally, I worked up the nerve to sit up and peek out the windshield. And there they were, standing like 10 feet in front of my car, just staring, not moving. I don't even remember grabbing my keys, but suddenly I had them, my hands shaking as I started the car. The second the headlights flicked on, they bolted, running off into the darkness. I didn't stick around to see where they went. I just floored it out of there, driving until I found a busy, well-lit gas station where I stayed the rest of the night, doors locked, headlights on, wide awake. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even now, whenever I drive past that part of town, I catch myself glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that figure again, lurking in the shadows. Before I start, I just want to say these are personal experiences and none of this is made up. The reason I'm making this post is that I don't really have anyone to talk to about this, so I just want your thoughts. There are too many things that have happened to note them all in this post, so I'll just go over some that stand out to me. When I was little, around 5 years old, I had this dream where I could see myself sleeping and I was floating above. I then floated over to my parents' room and saw my parents fast asleep. After that, I don't remember anything. However, apparently at that exact moment, my mom was having a similar dream where she saw me getting pulled out of the front door by some kind of shadow figure. Immediately at that same time, my mom heard a scream in real life and went out to see what's going on. She sees the front door wide open and me looking like I'm going back to sleep. I've chalked it up to astral projection or something, but really I do not know what that was. There's been a whole slew of other things that have happened that I won't get into right now, but what's been happening recently is really the main reason for this post. I keep hearing weird tapping and creaking noises in certain spots in my room at the weirdest moments. Not sure how to explain it, but other people who have heard it in my room admit the sound is weird, but try to rationalize that the sound is the house settling. Also, it's worth noting that this is not the same house I was in as that last story. Another thing that happened somewhat recently was that I was playing chess with my dad and had the pieces I had taken on the side of the table. Once the match is over, we go to put the pieces away and realize only one is missing. We both didn't drop anything or hide it. I literally searched the entire living room from top to bottom and never found the piece. One other thing that happened in this same house was that we were all in the living room playing a game or something, when we suddenly hear something break in the kitchen, go to check it, and a bowl that was already on the counter broke literally in half, just sitting on the counter. No one else was there. It didn't even shatter into a bunch of pieces. I need to share something truly unsettling that's been happening to me lately. About a month ago, my cousin passed away mysteriously. She was in the hospital for just one day, and the next night, around 2 to 3 a.m., I heard crying and the sound of digging graves. My room's window faces the graveyard, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. At that time, I had no idea she would be the one who was gone. I got up and went to the graveyard, only to find out she had passed away. A few days later, I was working late at night. I work remotely, and my hours are mostly late. Around 2 a.m., the lights went off. I like darkness, and my windows, which have nets, were open. Suddenly, I heard someone scratching on my window twice, like fingernails against nets. It terrified me because no one would dare to be out there at that hour. I froze for a moment, too scared to move. Eventually, I got up, turned on the lights, and closed the windows. I thought of going to another room, but decided to stay put. I closed my laptop and tried to sleep, eventually drifting off after about an hour. The next morning, I brushed it off as my imagination and jokingly told my mom about the scratches on my window. What she told me next gave me chills. She said similar strange things were happening to other people in town. For instance, my other cousin felt someone constantly touching her, thinking it was her younger sister, only to find out she was alone. Just last night, as I was about to fall asleep, I heard my mom calling me. I went to her room, but she was sound asleep. It was around 2 a.m. again. Later, as I was half asleep, I heard my brother calling me, even though he lives in a different country. I don't know what's going on, but these experiences are becoming more frequent and more disturbing. Has anyone else experienced something similar?